Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to the channel and the second episode of the F1 podcast obviously we've had several podcasts on the channel and this is the format we're going to go for, at least for the foreseeable future in Zem. But Stephen is on holiday, so you'll recognise the person next to me is not on a sofa and sitting next to me on it, it's actually Tinus all the way from South Africa. So Tinus, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
No problem at all. And obviously, if you've been paying attention to me and obviously Tinus's channel, you will obviously know that I've been on his channel a couple of times recently for his Tuscany GP review and also the Red Bull one. So make sure you kind of go and check out those videos. But just for those people who don't know TF1 Show, Tinus, do you want to give us a little bit of a rundown of what your channel is about?
Sure, happy to do that. Well, the TF1 Show, I guess similar to the podcast that we're going to do today, essentially all about Formula One, be it race recaps, talking about, the driver market, what else is happening in the world of F1. And you can find it, I guess, on YouTube or any podcasting platform that you use. I don't think there's one that it isn't on. So yeah, please go check it out if you want to listen to my beautiful voice.
There you go. That's one point, if anything, to just kind of listen to Tinus. But yes, podcasts are brilliant because we can go and have some in-depth chat. So we're actually, because Tinus is going to go on holiday, recording this on a Friday. So by the time this comes out on the Wednesday that you guys are watching, there might be some more up-to-date news that we don't cover that you go, why didn't you cover that one? I'm sure we'll kind of cover it from there. But basically what we're going to do is main point of topic is looking ahead to the Russian GP and just talking about some of maybe the key themes. As always with a F1 chat, we'll see where this kind of strands end up till it comes to a natural conclusion. But yes, so Russian GP, are you looking forward to it? This weekend, Tinus?
Looking forward might be a strong word. I think I'm accepting of it, in the sense of that I've made peace that it's going to happen and that I will watch. Look, maybe in fairness, I might be being a bit harsh on the Sochi race circuit. I do feel that here and there have been, a couple of exciting things that did happen. And at this point, I don't really think we can be too picky when it comes to watching Formula One races. I mean, it's just great that we have the opportunity to still watch and still enjoy and still talk about it. So yes, you know what? In conclusion, I am excited for the Russian Grand Prix just to see how everything that's been going on unfolds and I guess how the remainder of the season develops.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those tracks again that modern F1 shines a horrible light on in terms of, I can't remember, when was the first time Sochi came on? Was it around about the 2013, 2014
It was
time?
2014, so I think it was the first year of the new turbo hybrid regulations that it was held.
Yeah, so in its current format, it never really stood a chance, I don't think, in terms of we've never really seen how a smaller, nimbler car would look on, because essentially, in essence, it is a kind of street circuit. I know it's not technically a road, but it kind of has that street circuit feel to it. It's very kind of narrow, windy. I suppose the widest part is that massive DRS zone that's very long straight, isn't it? Through that coming into the braking zone. And I guess with smaller cars, we'll see probably with the F2 racing there this weekend that what it'll be like with a small and simple aero car. So I think it always gets a bad reputation for that, because the size of the cars always make it overtaken with those kind of right angle corners. It does make it really difficult for cars to go side by side through, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that has been historically a problem is even the tarmac, which is apparently like the smoothest out of all the tracks almost on the calendar, which then means tire wear is really a non-issue. Where I don't know if you remember, I think it was the first or second race when of the turbo hybrid era where Rosberg had the massive lockup into turn one on the opening lap, and then he just pitted on that lap for hard tires and just ran those tires for the remainder of the race without any issues. So I guess you never know with the tires that they have this year. I don't know if they're going to choose softer compounds, whether that's going to make a difference. But I think, the bit of tire jeopardy that we typically have at a race is very much reduced at the Sochi circuit, where it becomes a bit more of a pit stop procession, where you do your mandatory one stop, put on your tires, and then just continue on as per normal. And that coupled with the fact that, overtaking on this track, except with the massive pace offset, isn't really going to be possible. That's, I guess, sort of the recipe as to why we have seen a bit of a dull race in Russia historically.
I'm going to pick up there on obviously the tyre issue. Do you think that's an issue as a whole in Formula One, that we often look to races, especially this season, because Mercedes are just so brilliant, that we look at tyre wear and we go, well, hopefully the tyres come into play a little bit more, because that might, spice it up, which, it's just frustrating how large that gap is. And it's no fault to Mercedes. Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton have been absolutely brilliant, like they've been for the past 7 years. And, they they just keep carrying on to do it. And like we've spoken about many times before, it's the responsibility of Ferrari and Red Bull to build a better car. But yeah, it seems a shame that, we look at a track like a surface. The surface shouldn't really pay too much attention. Yes, it'd be interesting if some tracks, had more tyre wear there, but we look at it and we put it as a down point to the track, because it's one of the few things that can spice up a Formula One race these days.
Yeah, it's exactly that, right? I guess it's just another symptom of the current regulations that we are in, where we sort of hope for artificial excitement in a sense, due to, the variability that tire wear and tire degradation offers. But that actually doesn't speak to the core issue that we're currently facing in F1, which obviously we hope will be solved with the new regulations and everything that changes there. So yeah, I guess the symptom of where we are currently is just exacerbated at a track like Sochi. And I think there are a couple of tracks like this on the calendar. I mean, Barcelona is always another classic one, where the track in itself is actually probably a really interesting track, and I think a track that the drivers enjoy driving. It's just the racing or the track just really amplifies the shortcomings at the moment of the current regulations in terms of the cars and the car's ability to follow, and how, and then subsequently how the tires react to all of this.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. The layout, like you said, for the drivers is probably quite interesting. And driving it on the game, I'll probably commit a cardinal sin here, but if we compare it to somewhere like Interlagos, which people go, don't you dare bring Brazil, our blessed child, into this. But Brazil, I'm thinking that middle sector, a lot of people's problem is Sector 3 is awful at Sochi, because it literally provides no opportunities for overtaking whatsoever. But then you look at there's quite a lot of tracks that, Brazil, for an example, Sector 2, you can't really overtake in there. Hamilton tried, and obviously with poor circumstances for Albon in 2019.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? There's often there are sectors of tracks that you go, you can't really overtake there, and Sochi is no different in there, and it has the big long DRS zone. So I suppose it's probably the artificial overtaking zones with DRS and slipstreams, but there are opportunities to overtake. I think I don't understand really why it has honestly become a bit of a, well, it's a bit of a snooze fest. I don't know if it literally is just one, because you're like the tire wear and tire degradation. Mercedes have just been able to manage the race on a one-stop strategy, and so they've usually been so much further ahead of everyone. And Ferrari probably would have been interesting last year, but with whatever way they managed to cock up the race between Leclerc and Vettel, and
then Vettel had the engine failure, and then before you know it, it was just Mercedes 1-2 again. Exactly. Look, to be fair, there has been here and there a couple of exciting races. And now you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I think the race 2 years ago, I think the 2018 race I thought was quite exciting. Well, relatively exciting. I think it was that race where Hamilton overtook Vettel around is it turn 4, the super long left-hander.
Oh, I remember the overtake.
It's that loop, right? It's that loop where they go around, and then Hamilton caught Vettel on the brakes, and then there is overtaking opportunities into that corner as well, down into the DRS straight. So it's not like it's going to be a Monaco-like procession. I don't think that's going to be the case. I also, want to keep my options open, maybe with Russia still a bit, because maybe that's actually me talking, but the past isn't necessarily an indicator of the future. I remember, I don't know if you remember the first race that we had at Baku, where, or the first or the second race, where I can't remember now, you're my memory today. But in any case, the first race was crazy, or the second race was crazy. And then, but there was basically this expectation that this Baku layout was going to cause so much chaos, and obviously that incredibly long straight is going to be great for overtaking and for battling and so on. And it turned out to be the case, but there have been snoozes or snooze fests at Baku as well, because sometimes things just don't pan out the way we wanted to. So I am still holding out hope that we can see some exciting racing in Sochi, not at the front, because I think Mercedes is going to be really, really far ahead again. But the midfield, I think, should be really fun to watch, as it has been, I think, this whole season.
Well, I think that's where I think if people want a look at, well, I think, like I said, 2022 is probably not the place to look. That's probably going to be some sort, because there's been a kind of like funding element of it that they still would have, Mercedes and Red Bulls and Ferraris would have put a lot more aside than the average team for it. But the 23s, 24s, 25s, the midfield, I say their budgets are pretty similar. The McLarens, the Renaults, now the Aston Martins, what Racing Points of the world, and AlphaTauri, I think, have a decent budget there. And you all see that, and it is pretty close. And predicting the midfield this year is like, if you literally took out Max, Bottas, and Hamilton, you'd have a hell of a championship.
Yeah, it's freaking amazing.
Because you literally go like last race in the Tuscan GP, McLaren, we would probably go, they should have been the stronger ones, and Renault on a more downforce track, they seem to be doing better kind of with less downforce, but then they seem to be much better on that front. And you just literally cannot predict what happens, and even the kind of supposed outcomes just aren't happening, which, if you watch those sorts of scenarios. So I think if the midfield action is good in Sochi, I think there's hope that it potentially can be a good track in the future.
Agreed. Nothing there that I can say to disagree with you.
Just correct. That's what you're saying, Tinus. Just going everything correct.
Stamp of approval. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
On that one. So we'll look probably more to drivers and something. So we have one Russian driver on the grid currently, obviously with Robert Schwartzman doing well in Formula 2, although he has dropped down a little bit in the championship of recent. But I think there's an air of inevitability that Robert Schwartzman will join F1 one day. But our current Russian driver, Daniil Kvyat, now obviously he's had a very tricky relationship with Red Bull over his time within Formula 1.
Put it mildly.
So obviously Daniil Kvyat going into, could this be his last home GP in Formula 1?
I think there's a strong possibility. If you look at what's happening sort of around him, where, well, first and foremost, his teammate has sort of been, I'd say, the better one out of the two of them. I don't think Kvyat has been terrible this year. It's not like he's been dropping the ball or anything. It's just Gasly has been proper hustling that AlphaTauri this whole season, and he's obviously now had the race victory, slightly fortunate race victory, but at the end of the day, I mean, he still has the points, and it's just, if you look at the scoreboard, the one is clearly ahead of the other. So I'd say that's maybe the first thing, which I guess wouldn't have been a problem normally if they didn't have Yuki Tsunoda and even, Yuri Vips, but that's, a whole other discussion. But they have two really exciting juniors waiting in the wings for that AlphaTauri seat. And I mean, Red Bull struggles with their junior drivers. Oh, an aeroplane's going overhead. How exciting. Red Bull struggles with their junior drivers has been well documented, especially over the last couple of years. And I mean, I'm going to put in a quick plug. Just go and listen to our Red Bull episode on my channel, where we discuss, all of Red Bull's problems in depth. But I think they probably want to promote one of their juniors into, oh my goodness. Sorry, my cat has literally had a heart attack. In any case.
That's all right. I was meowing earlier in the stream, so we're being very cat affected from this.
Yeah, it's been a struggle. And just go outside. In any case, so Red Bull, they want to promote from within, and I think they have an opportunity for the first time in a long time where they actually have, a Red Bull back junior in Yuki Tsunoda, who's doing really well in Formula 2, I think, given everything as a rookie. He's Honda backed, he's Japanese. So I think there's going to be a very strong push for him to have that F1 seat if he can get the super license points, which obviously I think he needs to come fourth in the championship.
He's got to finish fourth to be able to do it. I think there is no doubt in my mind, if Yuki Tsunoda finishes fourth in the F2 championship, Daniel Kvyat is 100% gone. The only way I can really see Daniel Kvyat staying is because I don't think, obviously Yuri Vips is competing in Super Formula, and that would be incredibly tough to gain the super license points he goes, because that's one of the hardest championships to go and competing, especially kind of fresh off with no experience, especially because they have such an experienced grid competing there. It's not beyond the realms of possibility with Yuri, because he is a talented young driver, but the Estonian national flag unfortunately isn't as appealing as the Japanese national flag for the Red Bull Honda program. So yeah, Daniel, I think we did speak about it on the Red Bull episodes. It just feels for me that he seems well and truly broken since last summer, because I think what happened is obviously he had that opportunity with Red Bull, had a bad race, but they promoted Max Verstappen. We look ahead now, is that necessarily a bad decision promoting Max Verstappen to your main team? It's not. It's the harsh realities. It's, well, probably talk about it. It's the Checo and Vettels. If, the only option was you had two, you kind of were looking at the two drivers. Do I want a Sergio Perez or Sebastian Vettel? It's a very difficult choice. But, Sebastian Vettel probably is the long-term option, because the ceiling is potentially higher if he could go. And I think, obviously, that's what they saw with Max Verstappen ahead of Daniel Kvyat. But, that crushed him. He didn't do well, went away, became a development driver for Ferrari. And I felt like he was kind of shook himself and he's like, come on, Daniel, right, we're going to get a chance. We're going to prove them wrong. And I think in that first half of the season with Toro Rosso last year, he did that. And I don't think he's maybe given enough credit.
Yeah, he did well. I think him and Albon were basically neck and neck during that season. And I'll probably say the only reason that Kvyat wasn't promoted in place of Albon was because Red Bull said, okay, well, they've already had Kvyat. So they don't want him again. They'd rather give Albon another chance. Which,
for me, is just a kind of cover up for saying Helmut Marko doesn't like me.
Yeah, no, literally.
Essentially, that's because if you were looking at the two drivers and you know what Daniel Kvyat can give you, then you would have promoted Daniel Kvyat.
At that point, I was proper surprised when they promoted Albon. And look, I thought Albon was doing really well given the circumstances, the fact that he was sort of pulled into the team last minute, and the fact that he was matching Kvyat in the way that he was doing was really impressive. But I mean, Daniel has already driven for Red Bull, and he was decent. Like, he really wasn't that bad, like pace wise at least, compared to Ricciardo at that point.
I believe he beat Ricciardo in the 2015.
He beat Ricciardo in the one season, yeah. So I was surprised, I have to say, that they didn't decide to promote Kvyat, because I think he did show, as you say, over that first half of the season that he does still have the ambition and I think the pace. If pace was their criteria, then he had equal pace to Albon more or less at that point. So yeah, I think as I said, I think the big thing for Red Bull was just that no backseas rule. They were just like, no, you had your chance. We are a proud energy drink company that dabbles in motorsport. We will not promote you again into the team. We will give someone else a shot. And whether that's the right decision, I don't know. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, I don't really know. I feel like Daniel Kvyat's going to be one of those careers that you kind of look at. You can say he's got more opportunity than most, and for whatever reason, it hasn't impressed. But he now seems to be in a situation where I can't see any outside teams wanting to take a punt on him, because he's just been good. I'd say he's been solid since that summer. But you could clearly see that it took the wind out of his sails, and Gasly's come back and done what Pierre's done, which has been incredible to watch. And so, yeah, if I was like a Haas or an Alfa Romeo, which I don't think Alfa Romeo is going to be a seat for anyone the way that they're talking, I'm pretty sure that's going to be Kimi Räikkönen and Mick Schumacher next year. And then Haas will be a Magnussen and one other. That might still be Grosjean.
Yeah, potentially. If it is Grosjean, Mike, I will literally start asking serious questions about that team's management. Because look, Grosjean, look, he did okay during Tuscany, but I just think if you had to list all of the drivers that you have available to yourself, as if you're Haas, and let's say the potential cost of having that driver in your lineup, I don't understand how Roman Grosjean can be number one on that list after Kevin Magnussen. I don't understand.
Issue, I think, is before keeping him, you would go, well, Kevin's still new, but now Kevin knows how they go work inside out. And we know there was obviously friction with Kevin within the team. Kevin's been desperately unlucky with luck this season within Formula One. But yeah, with Grosjean, you're right. Haas have got to look, and they're going, well, for the last 2 seasons, we're pretty much getting the same results. Would it hurt us? I know they have a difficult team of operating it, because it's not like if Nico Hulkenberg went in last year, if Nico Hulkenberg came in there, it's not like going from Renault to another similar sort of outfit. It's very different, because obviously they get their parts, the development's a lot slower, and there is this heavy reliance on the driver knowing exactly how the team works. So that's an advantage Grosjean has. But at some point, you've got to probably ask yourself, do we just keep doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same results, or do we give someone a chance to do better, whether that be a youngster in Eilert, Schwartzman, or an experienced guy in Perez and Hulkenberg?
No, exactly. And you've essentially listed the 4 guys that I think should get an opportunity before Grosjean. And look, and people are always so mean to Roman, and some of it justified, some of it isn't. But my thinking is just, I don't even understand why they kept Grosjean for this year, to be quite honest. Because, and it's nothing against, let's say, his theoretical driver ability. It's just the fact that if you think about where Haas is as a team, what they're trying to achieve, they're operating on a limited budget. They need to maximize everything that they do in order to do well and compete with, the big midfield teams like Renault and McLaren. Having Magnussen and Grosjean as your driver lineup, yes, they might understand how the team operates, but they're just so inconsistent. And you can't have a driver performing well 4 races out of 21. And then when they do well, they do really well, and like they're incredibly impressive. But for the 17 other races, what do you have? You can't develop your car. You have damage on the second lap due to some sort of incident. You can't collect the data that you need to collect. And I think this is a problem for both Magnussen and Grosjean, but maybe to a larger extent Grosjean recently. And if they want to have one of them in the car, I think they need to get a bit of a more trusty workhorse in the other seat if they don't want to take the development driver route in Eilert or Schwartzman. So that's why I feel if they can get Perez or Hulkenberg and they're hell bent on keeping Magnussen, just get one of them. And let Grosjean live out his ultimate French fantasy of creating a little restaurant at the bottom of Provence where him and his wife can cook artisanal dishes and serve them to curious tourists that want to eat the food prepared by a former Formula One driver. Like, I think that is the ideal scenario for Haas at this moment.
I'm going to defend both of them a little bit. I think because I always feel it is difficult in teams like that. The amount of mechanical failures that Grosjean got in the 2019 season and that Magnussen's got in 2020 season, I think it's very difficult. So I thought they gave Grosjean the opportunity because it would have been very harsh to drop the guy last year, because there were literally things on his car retiring that I had no idea you could retire a car. And I was like going, what's gone wrong this time? And, he'd been loyal to the team, and he took a big gamble on joining them in 2016 when Roman Grosjean, we forget, was a desirable asset back at the 2015 season. So I guess there's been some loyalty to Roman, and as much as the joking and stuff cameras go on the Drive to Survive series, I think he is probably very well respected within that team. Obviously there's a negative agenda, I would say, around Roman. Not a lot of people seem to give him time of day, and he is a kind of low person. But it's got now to the extent, I think with Roman, they can let him see him go and just go, you know what, whether it's us or whether it's you, this partnership isn't working out. Magnussen definitely, I think, deserves to stay. I think he is still a super talented guy within Formula One who hasn't really been given. It's difficult to say. He's been in Formula One for since 2014 with a break year for being a test driver in between them, but he hasn't really been given a proper shot other than Haas, and Haas have had one good season and two disastrous seasons in my books. So it's difficult on that front. So yeah, I just think the right direction to go, where I would get rid of Grosjean is I would go, well, we're not looking at these regulations in 2021. In 2022, do we think Roman Grosjean is the right guy to lead us forward into a new set of regulations? I would go, no. Kevin Magnussen at 26, 27, coming into his prime, I would go, well, he's a pretty solid bet with great experience. He could be a Perez-esque driver already in that situation. And then it's up to them. They've always favoured more on the experience side, which brings Perez and Hulkenberg into play. Or, whether they want Eilert or Schwartzman to go, we give him 2021 just to get a season under his belt. And then hopefully in 2022, he's a talented driver.
Yeah, agreed with all of that. I think that makes sense. I personally, if I was Günther Steiner, I would probably go. It's tough, actually. I think Haas needs to have a bit of a new beginning. I think out with the old, in with the new. They've tried the old now for 3 years. So do you want Perez or Hulkenberg in that seat next to Magnussen? I don't know at this point. If they're going to keep Magnussen, I think they need a young driver. I think either Schwartzman or Eilert in that seat next year to be embedded in the team before, let's say, their first legitimate march up the order begins, or at least they hope begins in 2022. So then they have two experienced drivers driving for the team at that point. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how this all develops. I'm not going to lie, because I think it can go either way.
I think it is the most interesting seat yet to be decided. Because I think now how things have transpired, we do kind of, there seems an air of inevitability that Kimi will stay and he will partner Mick Schumacher, and Giovinazzi will end his Formula One career.
Mm.
But yeah, Haas is really interesting. I will probably go for Callum Ilott because
Yes,
unless Perez obviously brings big bucks, big money, and you could have that American-Mexico link. Well, that could work very well in terms of boosting a fan base and boosting, support behind the team. And if Gene Haas wanted to sell, I think there would be ready investors to kind of take over with Haas and Sergio Perez. But I think Callum Ilott is a guy that doesn't really have any prospect of driving for Ferrari unless somehow it comes later down the line. So Callum Ilott, if he does develop into a super talented guy, he's clearly shown that he has the pace in Formula 2. At times, and with that championship, there are inconsistencies. They're young drivers, they're learning type of situation. But he's the one who's a raw talent that, if refined, he's either a really valuable asset that they could tie down to a long-term contract and get a big payday if someone buys him out, or he drives them forwards going forward. Where I think Robert Schwartzman, if he did well in Haas, Ferrari would come knocking and come looking on the door.
That's a very good point, actually. I think that's a really, really good point. From a Haas perspective as to which one of the two would make more sense. And I agree, Ilott is probably the better choice. I think over and above the fact that looking at the last couple of races in F2, Shortman obviously had a great start to the season, but I think there are more and more arguments popping up for him to maybe do another season in F2. If you compare him against Ilott and Schumacher, I think they're probably the two FDA drivers that show the most F1 readiness, if I can call it that. Where obviously Schwartzman is sort of touted to be, one of the next gen bests. But I think, from a Haas perspective, probably Ilott would make more sense because I think he's a longer term prospect for them, firstly. And secondly, he might not cost them as much as Schwartzman maybe would, just given, I don't know, the hype and reputation that they have coming into the seats. So, interesting point. Definitely agree.
I suppose the real curveball, just before we round off Haas in terms of that part of the podcast, would be Louis Delatraz. Has his super license, worked with the team as a development driver, so understands how the team works, done a lot of work with fitting there. And I would say Louis been pretty impressive in Formula 2 under the radar, because with Haru's his team, obviously they're a midfield team. They're not going to be competing with the likes at the top, given the championship. But, Louis at times has shown obviously very positive showings within Formula 2 within the limitations of that Haru's team.
That is a very interesting curveball. I tend to agree with everything that you said. I have to say, still, for me, trying to figure out in F2 sort of the pecking order of the teams and, the cars and things like that is really tough, just because I feel like, because it's so setup driven, I think you see like some teams that have been right at the back in previous race, all of a sudden are competing for pole position the next race. So it's tough for me to really put like let's say an overall rating on how well Louis Delatraz has been doing. I think if I just had to think back to the F2 races over the season, he's been doing well recently. I think it seems like he's figured out something within the car, in the team, or within himself, where he's sort of back up at least in the points, competing there consistently. But I'd say up until Silverstone, it was a bit of a struggle. Like, I didn't really see Louis Delatraz compete. So again, I think it's going to be difficult, especially since, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounded like Ferrari is trying to negotiate one of the seats at Haas to be for their junior drivers as well.
They will be, but I know from past, obviously, Haas don't care. They can be as good as they are, because we all know how good Charles Leclerc was, and they turned him down. So it would literally, Ferrari can negotiate as much as they want, but they are quite strong characters at Haas, because they're very admitting that they want to successful
if you
team.
look at Charles Leclerc, well, I guess again you can argue that they probably made the right choice in the sense of what Leclerc was in Sauber for a year and then he was gone, and I don't think that's something that Haas probably wants someone a bit longer term, because if you just essentially a conveyor belt for junior drivers to move up into the top teams, then you're not ever going to really build that consistent base that you need. So that's actually an interesting development.
Which is why I think they'll definitely turn down a Schwartzman. But they will probably see the relationship between Ferrari and Callum Ilott and see because a lot of stuff with Ferrari can be PR side as well. And yeah, there isn't really too many assets to Callum Ilott other than his raw natural talent. Mick Schumacher is the obvious, and Robert Schwartzman, there just seems to be a lot of excitement around him as well. So I don't know whatever reason it happens in the junior series with why one driver is hyped up over another, in terms of why, obviously Callum seems to be getting a lot of kind of positive following on social media, and he's earned that right throughout the season. With a great team in Uni Virtuosi, they've given him a fantastic platform this year to show what he's got. But yeah, I think Haas, if they are going to take a Ferrari one, it will be Callum Ilott.
Yeah, I agree. And let me be conclusive. I think if I was Haas, I would take Ilott over Delatraz, just because I think Ilott is proper talented. I think, just from what I've seen, even last year when he was also racing for Charouz, he got pole positions in that car. So I think in terms of raw speed, that guy is seriously fast. So I would probably go for Ilott over Delatraz if I was Günther Steiner, but I'm not. So
I'd funny say you'd probably compare Callum to a young Roman Grosjean-esque. I don't know if he's
oh my gosh, don't curse the man before he even gets into Formula One.
Well, hopefully he doesn't have the incidents that Roman does. But, Roman came in as an incredibly quick, talented youngster. And obviously 8, 9, 10 years down the line, we often forget that, how super talented he was as a junior.
And on his day, he still is. I mean, as I said, he does have race weekends where he's just so fast and nobody can really live with his pace. It's still there. It's just not accessed that often.
No, it's absolutely. So I think we'll round off last topic to discuss, which we'll see how long it takes us, because we've taken a fair amount of chunk on Haas. Midfield ahead of this weekend, we know it's kind of a flip of a coin. It will be between Aston Martin, McLaren, and Renault, no doubt. Pierre Gasly. No Ferrari.
They are part of the midfield.
They are part of the midfield, but I would say them and AlphaTauri are more on a similar sort of level, where it takes an immense drive from a Leclerc or a Gasly to give them any chance.
Top 10.
Fantastic result. So yeah, who do you see coming out on top this weekend? That's the $1 million question, because it's been, like I said, just crazy how it switched between the three of them.
So it seems like that upgrade that the Racing Point brought with, at the engine, the rear packaging of their car was working really well. If you had to compare Perez and Stroll's lap times in Mugello. So it seemed, or at least in my head, it looks like that Racing Point has taken quite a big step in terms of pure pace potential. So I would probably say, allowing for the fact that they need to repair and produce parts now for the one car, given that Stroll had his accident, if they can get the updates on both cars, I probably see Racing Point running at the front ahead of... Then McLaren and Renault, deciding between the two is really tough, because, as you said at the beginning, I think we had expectations of how it was going to, shake down at Mugello, given the relative strength of the McLaren and the Renault cars. And actually it turned out to work out in the opposite way that we expected, because it seems like the Renault car is really strong in the slow speed corners. So like the proper slow corners, the Renault car is much better than the McLaren. but then in the medium to high speed, the McLaren is the better car, which is why I think, when we went to Mugello, we expected that McLaren was going to be strong and Renault was going to struggle because there aren't any slow speed corners in Mugello. And, the opposite happened to be true. So this, to me, at least in terms of deciding on the pecking order between the two teams, have really confused me. Because if you think about Sochi, it has a bit of a mix of everything, but a lot of obviously, except for the big, that big turn 4, which is just one long corner taken flat out. It has a lot of right angled corners. So it's just sort of, like a normal, street intersection type corner. And given my relative understanding of the two cars, I would probably think McLaren would do better on Sochi. If you take sort of like an average across the racetrack and all of the different corners that they have, there isn't any long radius, slow corners like we have in, if you think about Hungary or anything like that. So that's why I think probably McLaren is going to be the better team. Conversely, if Renault can make big gains on, the straight or the faster sections like they have been able to do in Spa specifically, or in Monza, but I think Spa is maybe the best example here, where there's also a bit of a mix between, the super fast sector 1 and 3 and then the really twisty sector 2. If they can again strike that balance that they were able to strike at Spa between, still generating relatively good minimum speeds in the corners despite running a relatively low downforce setup, I think they could perform really well and probably mix it with the racing points. But I'd be very hard pressed to tell you between McLaren and Renault who's going to come on top. I think they also don't know. I think if you had to ask them, they'd also be like, well, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think qualifying could be key in that Renault-powered battle, because I think if Ricciardo can get ahead, just thinking of Sector 3 in my head, it should suit the Renault in terms of building up enough of an advantage that on the straight, they should be able to defend against the McLarens pretty easy, obviously into that kind of kink in the road that is turn 1. Because, it is a slower section, especially going into that chicane and then accelerate, brake. It's kind of last 2 medium speed corners, but you've got no real chance of building some sort of momentum up to you. It's not the same as Spa in terms of that exit, because I think the now bus stop chicane makes it really difficult to gain any sort of momentum in the DRS zone on the straight. But to some similar sort of aspect of it, I think if Ricciardo can get ahead, I think he will finish ahead of the McLarens. Ocon, it depends which Esteban Ocon turns up. He's been
That's the thing. So I think it's tough with Ocon, because I think with Norris and Sainz, we sort of know what we're going to get in terms of they're going to be up there. They will maximize the potential of the car to a large extent and sort of give a true reflection of where the car should be. And we've seen that obviously with the Ricciardo as well. And I think if Ocon can he's getting there. I think he's sort of building up his way next to Ricciardo. If he can do as well as I think he should be doing, then I think he can finish ahead of the McLarens as well, because I think he's probably going to be very closely matched to Daniel.
Well, that's an interesting question. This will be the last point we'll round off the podcast with. In terms of, Stephen posed it as a question to me last week. It's like, we obviously, on the channel, we've been a fair bit critical towards Alexander Albon and, his pace and relative where he needs to be. And he said, well, if we've been harsh to Alexander Albon and Max Verstappen, we probably need to look, because Renault have gone a little bit under the radar in terms of, we've been praising Daniel Ricciardo for me, one of the drivers of the season. If we look at, where Esteban Ocon has been, that gap has been pretty much the same all the way through the season. The results wise, in terms of positions finished, might have been the same, but his gap to Ricciardo hasn't really improved at all through the season. Are we looking at Esteban Ocon in terms of, bigger picture? 2021 is not going to be easy against Fernando Alonso, but what do we need to see from Esteban that in 2021 well, 2022 Renault don't look at him and go, well, maybe we want a Pierre Gasly?
I think he just needs to hook up his lap when he needs to, because I think more often than not, that's been the problem, where I think he's still a bit inconsistent. And I don't know if we can maybe give him the benefit of the doubt there because of the fact that, he had the year out and everything that was going on around his, with his seat in F1 and all of the drama there. Obviously, now needs to find his feet again. And I think where Ocon has, for me at least, been better than Albon relative to Verstappen is in practice. Like, the thing is with Albon, like literally from FP1 through to FP3 qualifying, if you look at the beginning of the season, there was that deficit. Whether you doesn't matter what was going on, there was always some sort of deficit to Max. And then obviously in qualifying, that deficit persistent or in some cases grew. Where with Ocon, I think it's less of a, how can I say it? Less of a fundamental issue, I feel. Just if I look at his performances relative to Daniel, if you look at how he goes in practice, I mean, there've been many occasions where Ocon has been faster than Daniel. Now, whether that's a question when we get to qualifying, whether Daniel just at that point really understands the Renault and knows how to, I guess, build up to qualifying better than what Ocon does, possibly. I think there's an argument to be made there. I agree, though, that Ocon has struggled in qualifying, especially relative to Ricciardo, except obviously in the rain where he qualified incredibly well, which I think we shouldn't discount. I think qualifying performance or performance in the rain in general, to me, is a really good barometer of how good a driver could be given the circumstances. Because I mean, there are so many examples in history where the very best are the best in the rain and the wet as well. And we've seen, if you think about what happened in Austria the Styrian Grand Prix qualifying, it was Hamilton, Verstappen, Sainz, and Ocon. Those were your top four qualifiers. So I don't know. I think, obviously it's one race and one event, but I think that should at least give us a bit of a hint as to what he is capable of when the chips fall in the right way. So I think that, to me, answers the qualifying question. I think agreed that there's work to be done, but I don't think the issue is the same as what Albon has been experiencing necessarily in qualifying. And then in the race, Ocon has actually been pretty close to Daniel. Again, whether he's been as fast, not sure I can say. But if you look at their race pace relative to each other, it's pretty close. It's not, again, what we saw, with Gasly at Red Bull, or even Albon at some points this year, where it's a second a lap, or 7/10 a lap that he loses to Verstappen. It's not. It's a tenth, maybe 2/10. Sometimes Ocon is the faster car. So I think there's a lot more nuance in comparing Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon compared to somebody like Verstappen and Albon. Because, the Albon difference is clear as day to see, even as much as it pains me. And he's getting better. But that's a difference across the board. Where with Esteban, you can see places where he's maybe doing as good a job as Daniel. And now it's sort of, I guess, ensuring that the remaining gaps are closed. So I think he can do it. Maybe in conclusion, I've been talking for so long now. I think if he can get close to Ricciardo by the end of the season. Alonso, I've no idea what Fernando Alonso we're going to get. I have no idea whether he's going to be a good Fernando Alonso or a bad Fernando Alonso. I'm worried that it might be a bit of a Michael Schumacher situation where, obviously returning after a couple of years out of the sport, and it just doesn't work out in the way that it was working out before. So it's going to be interesting to see.
The interesting one on that Alonso one was, I always thought, I still think that situation that come 2022, if Renault have put a competitive package, he said that I've just come back for 2 years. I'm coming back to enjoy, kind of help out, enjoying my time. And maybe, because he's a human being. Maybe he's not immune to the stuff that, he's a polarized character. So many people now, when Fernando Alonso's name comes up in the room, it's either, a rational fandom probably at times, or the other extent where they absolutely hate him and loathe him as a person and think that, you know, he's one of the most disgusting human beings to be involved in Formula One. That's probably a bit extreme, but you know what I mean in terms of that's the scale of Fernando. There doesn't seem to be kind of that medium in between of, well, he's a super talented guy, didn't quite work out in Formula One how it probably should have done. You know, we probably should be talking about Fernando Alonso as a 5-time, 6-time world champion with the raw ability that he has. But for whatever reason, that didn't work out. But yeah, with Ocon, just to round off an interesting one, obviously he came across, I think, quite well in that Drive to Survive series. But what I would say, do you think he maybe struggles with people and getting people to warm to him in the Formula One environment? Obviously across ATV as well. But I look at Perez, and Perez is generally as a whole got on quite well with teammates, and it was quite, you know, open that it didn't go too well. I look at, you know, the course over the season with Daniel Ricciardo, and he hasn't necessarily. I look at Daniel Ricciardo's previous relationships with teammates, even that short time with Nico Hulkenberg might have made more sense because they were a similar sort of age, so they have similar sort of interest. But, you know, with Max Verstappen, with Lando Norris, and they're not even teammates, and they've built some sort of relationship together. I haven't really seen any kind of Esteban and Daniel relationship. It may just be I haven't noticed it at all, you go, but there's something about Esteban that makes me feel like he's a difficult person to get along with, and that's not kind of to detract with talent, but
yeah,
seems something there with him that it doesn't quite sit right.
No, I get 100% get what you're saying, and to me it's so strange because I actually like Ocon. Like I don't know, I find him endearing in a way because I think you can see he's sort of trying to come across as friendly, or, you know, at least like, you know, chilled, doesn't really like just he tries to come across as a nice guy, but so many people for some reason don't really, I don't know, they feel he's a bit cold, or they just don't have that, I don't know, what's the word, they just, I don't know, don't associate as well with Esteban Ocon like what they do. If you think about the other junior drivers like Albon and Russell and Norris, and to me it's a really interesting situation because I think Ocon is quite a I think he's combative as a driver, so he's quite cutthroat and he does things that are on the limit. Whether that's a bad thing, don't know, don't think so. I think Verstappen is similar in that sense. I don't think Ocon drives differently necessarily in terms of his approach compared to somebody like Max Verstappen. And I think, or at least that's my view, that that's what rubbed Perez the wrong way. Because if you know, like Nico Hulkenberg is a really quick driver, but he's not going to be the one causing drama. Like he's not somebody that really does a lot of controversial things on track, or would sort of go out of his way to be selfish and do whatever he wants. So I think that's what probably got Perez hot under the collar. And I still maintain that, and for some reason this myth exists that Ocon was the reason for all of the comings together that Force India had during that year, but it's not true. It's as much Perez as what it was Ocon. I just think Ocon was the guy that awoken that sort of, I don't want to call it a beast, but I guess that side of Perez's driving, because Ocon was probably the one that threatened Sergio the most during his whole tenure at Force India, because he was consistently faster than him in qualifying, and then during the race they always seemed to gravitate towards each other, where it was either the one ahead of the other, or and then they used to have a coming together. So I think it's really unfair for people to say, oh, but Ocon causes trouble in the team. I don't think he does. I think he is just a really hard race driver. And I think if you had to put Verstappen in the Force India team in his first season, probably would be seeing something similar, like what we saw with, you know, if you think about how Verstappen and Sainz, maybe it wasn't as well publicized, but there was fireworks when the two of them were at Toro Rosso. I mean, really competitive stuff as well. So I think we need to take that element of Ocon and maybe just be a bit more open-minded about it, that he hasn't really caused any trouble this year at Renault.
No,
I would say.
I don't think it's necessarily caused it. Obviously, yeah, people think he doesn't warm that pair, saying he's a troublemaker. But there's just something about it. I think maybe you mentioned him, that people think he's quite cold. I think he's quite an introverted character. I think he's a bit like Kimi in terms of, I think he hates the social media, and not social media, but just media in general. I think he hates the fact that he has to be. I think if he could just get in a race car, drive, and not talk to anybody, I think he'd be a happy guy.
Yeah, and I also think he feels like he has to prove a lot for some reason. I think he has that, and I don't know whether that has anything to do with his background. Obviously, if he came from quite a difficult, background in terms of finances and things like that until Mercedes picked him up. But I think Ocon, and it always feels like he's like desperate to do well. I don't know if you get that impression as well, but I feel like he's the one that really, really wants this to work out. And obviously, it's a good thing mostly, but sometimes that could come across. And I think that's why some people sort of feel like, okay, Ocon is just a bit too, like, feels like he's trying to please everyone and trying too hard to make it happen. So I don't know.
No, I can see that definitely. I would go. There's a few drivers it happens at the grid. Daniel Kvyat's probably another one. I don't really know who Esteban Ocon is. Like, I don't really know who Antonio Giovinazzi is. They're obviously the Drive to Survive people think a little bit, but I still just don't really kind of know where he stands, what he is. Sebastian Vettel, the Kimi Raikkonens, the Lewis Hamiltons, you know exactly who they are. The Norrises, the George Russells, the Max Verstappens, you know exactly who they are. And I think, a little bit of that, trying to please everyone with Esteban Ocon means that, when you try and do that, when you try and please everyone, you end up pleasing no one in that situation. And I think that's where he's caught. And he just needs to find that bit within himself of just be Esteban Ocon. If Esteban Ocon's a bit of a dick at times, a hard-nosed racer, then that's fine. People will accept that because, you're honest about it. He shouldn't try to kind of, I don't think we'd have a problem. He has a history of not being well with Pierre Gasly. I don't think I had a problem if he was asked whether he congratulated him. If he said no because I wanted it to be him, I think that'd be fair. I'd actually probably appreciate that more from Ocon, because I'd go, yeah, damn right, I'd want to be the first French driver to win since 1995, wasn't it? With Panis. So yeah, I just think that will help in his, and I think that must be quite tiring for him as a personality, trying to probably be something that he's not. I don't know.
I think the longer he stays in F1, I think the better it will be, because it's easy to say, I think people like Norris and maybe Russell and Albon, they have this personality that's endeared them to people, from the outset. But even if you think about people like, I'm trying to think about examples now, even like somebody like Sebastian Vettel, it took us all a long while before we really started liking him. All of us liked Weber because Weber had, that personality that we all liked. And Vettel was sort of that annoying kid that was really fast, but in terms of personality, we were like, okay, he is a bit annoying. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater yet with Esteban Ocon, because I do think it's very much, if you think, like, if I had to be a Formula One driver tomorrow and I had to deal with, the press and the PR and everything they have to deal with, I don't know what I'll do.
Yeah.
How I would come across. Sometimes you say things and it comes across as completely something else, and intentionally, of course. So I think, Ocon is really an enigma, and I really like him. Like, for some reason, I just think I rate him, and I like the fact, and I don't know why I like it, but I like the fact that he beat Verstappen in F3, because it's always that little caveat, and all racing drivers have this, where they were just that 1% away from perfection. And I think that's the one for Verstappen, where that one season in junior Formula, Ocon was the one that won the championship and not Max. And I'm probably going to have, if Max fans watch this, I'm going to have lots of comments about, no, but Max had a bad car and a bad team, etc., etc. Okay, it's fine. Yes, he did. But yeah, so I don't know. I just like Ocon, and I also like his personality, which maybe should say something about my personality, but let's not dig into that.
No, I think you're right, and I think Sebastian Vettel is a really good example, definitely on that front. And I think, look, essentially with all racing drivers, you have to get the results on track, and he's been given this 2-year opportunity with Renault, and it's down to him now to do enough within that team to make them believe in him, that he is the guy to go forward with, either with Fernando Alonso post 2022 or in place of Fernando Alonso leading the team alongside maybe an Oscar Piastri. It probably would be somewhere down the line on that aspect. But yeah, mate, that's probably a good point to round off this podcast. It's been a good kind of F1 chat. We've gone in plenty of different tangents here all over the place, which is kind of been brilliant to chat to. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Had the best conversation. I feel we always have really good chats, and I feel the tangent conversations are the best conversations. So I think we have lots of that in this episode, I think.
Definitely did. Definitely that's what a podcast is for, isn't it? Just to kind of talk F1 and ramble and see where you end up in your different thoughts and kind of things that go there. But like I say, guys, there will be in the description links to obviously Tinus's social medias and his YouTube channel as well. Make sure you go and check it out. And if you haven't already, drop him a subscribe. Really great kind of channel of kind of podcast and F1 chats just like this one. Obviously, we've appeared on each other's channels quite a lot recently, but yeah, please go and check him out. It's generally kind of weekly podcasts around about race times when it is, and then if we can drop another feature video, go from there. But definitely go and check Tinus out from there. Great channel. No problem at all, mate. But that's it from us today. We hope you've enjoyed it. It will be Stephen returning next weekend. Obviously, we've launched our new Indie Fanatics channel as well. So later on today, we'll have another collaboration with Rick from Race Fan Heaven. So make sure you guys check that one out as well, because IndyCar is another great racing series that I think needs a little bit of love. A bit like Tinus thinks Esteban Ocon needs a bit more love in his life. Yes. But yeah, that's it from us. So guys, for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.